Time for the international newspapers on France 24. Now, Olivia Salzar-Winspear is with us here on set. You're going to start off in Iraq, aren't you? The news that the Iraqi vice president has been sentenced to death. What are the international papers saying of that?
Yes, that's on the front cover of the New York Times and its international edition, the International Herald Tribune, as it is on the front of many of the US and UK papers here. Tariq al-Hashimi, the vice president of Iraq, has been sentenced to death in absentia because he's actually in exile at the moment in Turkey. He's been deemed responsible for the murder of hundreds of Iraqis via a string of attacks that he's said to have organised through paramilitary death squads. Now, what's interesting about this article in the New York Times is they put it into the context of the ongoing terror and violence which has been happening in Iraq this weekend. As you've already been reported, this weekend there's been a string of suicide bombers, car bombs that have killed dozens of Iraqi civilians. And they've targeted law enforcement agencies, the military, even the French consulate was targeted in Baghdad. And what the journalist says is that this kind of very incendiary decision really could stoke tensions, sectarian tensions that are already existing in Iraq between Sunnis, Shiites and Kurds. And the vice president was a Sunni opponent of the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, who's a Shiite. And they're saying that this kind of dispute could really lead to a breakdown in political dialogue, and if so, it could eventually lead to the kind of tensions that could leave a power vacuum and would see more of this kind of insurgency, this very violent insurgency, in the weeks and months to come. I mean, it was one of the worst episodes of violence of this year in Iraq.
OK, well, one other story which is taking up a lot of newspaper space at the moment is the continuing situation, developing story, really, about the British family murdered in the Alps. Still a big story over there, isn't it?
Yeah, in the UK, of course, the press are pouncing on any information they can get about this story, which until now has remained reasonably mysterious as when it comes to a motive of why this family were killed so brutally in the Alps. Last week, there had been a rumour about a family feud between the deceased man and his brother over perhaps money or an inheritance. Now, the Telegraph are reporting that the brother has come forward to the British police to give his side of the story, and really his argument is that there is absolutely no conflict between the two brothers. They're also reporting on the fact that the eldest daughter of the family has just regained consciousness from the artificial coma she was in because she suffered serious gunshot wounds. She is in a stable condition now, and she's been joined by her maternal aunt, who it's believed will be looking after her and her younger sister in the short term and maybe even the long term. The Guardian were covering this story on their front page as well this morning, and they're really honing in on the absolute mystery of the whole story, the fact that British police and French police are really struggling to find a motive for why this very brutal killing happened. They've made a list of possibilities. We've got the family feud lead that was evoked in the Telegraph as well, although they do feel that it was such a brutal murder that couldn't be really realistic. There's the idea of a botched robbery, but again, it's quite violent for a robbery. And there are even rumours of a link to intelligence. This man, Saeed al-Hili, was under surveillance in 2003. But in the overriding feeling is it's really, there seems to be no motive, and the police are none the wiser as to where or who the killer might be.
Yeah, it's a horrific story, but a fascinating one, isn't it? Finally, just time to talk about the Paralympic Games. Obviously, London's big summer finally over.
Yes, and the press, of course, this morning in Britain was just a bouquet of fireworks on every front page. The Independent headlined with "There is a flame that will never go out," a nice little wink to the Smiths song "There is a light that will never go out," I think celebrating all the British music we saw in the opening and closing ceremonies. And there's a glowing report from The Guardian as well, who cast a bit of a critical eye on how we did on the Paralympic Games and the Olympic Games. And they raised an interesting point in an editorial that these Paralympic Games have really brought the focus onto disabled facilities in sports in Britain and elsewhere. And they said that we really need to push, disabled access in gyms, sports centres, to get the kind of Paralympic success for Rio 2016 and in the future.
It's about the legacy of the Games now, isn't it? Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Salzar-Winspear with the international papers on France 24.